It is my pleasure and my honor to be here at the art gallery today, the Legacy Art Gallery, which is one of UVic's art galleries, on the land of the Sechotin and Lekwungen speaking people, on the land of the Hasanich people, Songhees and Esquimalt. It is my privilege and my honor to introduce you to Dr. Humphrey Nick Claxton, who not only is the author of all this work on the ReefNet technology and to fishes formerly, but also co-curator of this exhibition at the Legacy Art Gallery. So we will have Nick and Julie. Katie, sorry.
Katie Hughes.
I'm sorry, Katie Hughes with us today, co-facilitating the tour. We appreciate your patience with us because this is a new format in which we will be doing the session, and we will have definitely some time for questions and answers at the end. So, I squash Hela. It's getting better. Thank you for being with us today, Nick.
RCM, Nisjalacha, Jana Quincenatal Techo, I Nisquela Quince Canana Hela, Nisti Quinus, Chicha, Thanas Jalacha, Songus, Isquematheth, Sanich, Asa Humfault, Chus Lasanath, Theout, Neath, Sanich, Thana Elaganakta, Iasin Knes Etha. So that's a few words of welcome and acknowledgement to all of you. I said I'm glad that you could be here virtually. And I said how good it makes me feel to see all of you. So my welcome and acknowledgements were to all of you, but also to our relatives of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations whose land we are on. And the welcome and acknowledgement was in Sinchothan, which is one of the original languages of this territory, along with Lekwungen. That's the Songhees and Esquimalt nations' language. Those two languages, while they are dialects of the Straight Salish language, we could speak to each other. And there was a lot of interrelational ties between our communities and our nations. So I really want to acknowledge them and hold them up. I also want to acknowledge that the Lekwungen also ReefNet fished. So it was really part of my hope that this exhibit focused on revitalizing ReefNet knowledge could bring our nations together. I also introduced myself, my hereditary name as Humthalt, which is a name that was given to me by my grandfather, and along with that comes hereditary rights and obligations. So I acknowledge that, acknowledge my ancestors. I said that I come from the Theot community of the Saanich Nation. I'm also assistant professor in the School of Child and Youth Care. Before I was in the School of Child and Youth Care, I was started off as an advisor and then assistant teaching professor in Indigenous education, and taught many classes in Indigenous education. And I understand this course is a part of the Indigenous Education Summer Institute. Is that right, Carmen?
Yes.
Which I taught in alongside Carmen and other folks for a number of years, and it was quite an honor to be a part of the educational journey of future teachers, because I always thought about the future generations when I was working with students. So that's that's the same feeling I have for today, to be with all of you, thinking about the future generations. That's also a big theme, I think, of this exhibit. Aishka, I want to introduce to you and acknowledge Katie Hughes, who's a co-curator of this exhibit, and I want to invite her to see it.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Legacy Art Gallery. We wish that you could be here in person. We are open to the public again, and we are adhering to a lot of safety protocols. So if you are around, please do come to see the exhibition in person. My role here is as community engagement coordinator, but I was connected with Nick as part of my graduate project in the history department, and fortunately my supervisor John Lutz introduced me to Nick and to his dissertation on the reef net fishery resurgence work that he's been doing in his community, and I'm lucky that Nick agreed that we could turn this into an exhibition. And so my role has been to probably project manage would be the simplest way to explain the type of thing I've been doing, just gathering the different content, trying to research what could go in the exhibition, and to work with artists to develop. 3 of the artists that are in the exhibition are emerging artists, so we worked with them to create new work that would be in the exhibition relating to the reef net.
And what you're looking at is it's called Cornelian Reef Net Captain. It's a pole that was carved by Jacinton, my uncle John Elliott. He was also one of the main knowledge keepers and elders that I learned from. I learned about reef netting from him. So this is his pole that he carved. It is representing a reef net captain, and he's holding a coil of cedar bark rope, and you can see the anchors there, and some salmon. It's a beautiful pole. And I think one of the things that I mentioned before in my introduction was about the reef net and about the language, the Strait Salish languages. So one of the things that I also really need to acknowledge my late uncle, Earl Claxton Sr., who really started me on this journey probably could be like 20 years ago, before he passed, when he started to teach me about the Squaw or the reef net. But one of the things that he said was that all of the Strait Salish peoples, those are the peoples who spoke Strait Salish languages, the Songhees, Esquimalt, Saanich, Semiahmoo, Lummi people on the American side. He said really we're all Strait Salish people, and that we all reef net fished. And I'm hoping that as we go through this exhibit, you will get an understanding. I think part of the intent of this was also because this is going to be an educational tool we were hoping for, elementary kids, children in the school system, as well as the public who walk by here, tourists, if this would have been a non-COVID kind of year. Something that could be really educational to learn about the original peoples of this land through practice, the practice of fishing, but also through our language and through our connection to territory, they're all inseparable. And I wanted to bring back over here map, which was created, which illustrates the Saanich homelands, which my uncle, late Uncle Earl, taught me. He said, wherever there are place names in our language, that is part of our territory. And in traditional times, we didn't have hard borders, hard lines. it was really about relating to the land through our language and through our practices, ceremonies. That's how we related to the land. And you can see that if you just take the reef net as an example, a Swalet is a reef net fishing site. And you can see we had many reef net fishing sites, very specific locations within our territory, which spanned across that imaginary international border. Right, so you can see that our territory is quite vast, and obviously overlapped, right? That's a traditional way of relating to the land, and that's one of the things that I hope people could get a good understanding. Speaking about education, and Carmen and I co-wrote a chapter, if you remember, which I think talked a bit about using the reef net as an education system. And if you think about it from that sense, it's also, our education system is intertwined with not only our language, but also with the land and with the traditional ways that we structured our communities. And when we think about reef netting, the Cornelian, or the captain, was the person responsible for passing on knowledge. So that was an integral part of education, right? And this practice, included whole families, whole communities out on the land, right? So education, learning about the land was intertwined with our practice in that sense. So part of this exhibit includes some photos which were found in University of Washington Library Special Collections, but it shows reef netting in Lummi. These photos sort of dated back into the 1930s, but you can also already see the modern influences. The gentlemen are wearing, probably European clothes at that time and hats and things, but you can see that even at that time of European colonization and influence, our practices and beliefs connected to the land were still really intact and strong. Okay, so this is a drum that I made alongside Chris a couple of summers ago, working with education students. And working with Chris, he helped us to design and develop a design for us to put on the drum. And I was talking to Chris about, I wanted to create a design that illustrated the reef net and what we call the fleece, which is a hole that's purposely woven into the bunt end of the reef net to allow salmon to escape. And that was a way of conservation. Like, these reef nets were capable of catching thousands of fish, and I think had that capability of overfishing, but we didn't, because we intentionally put a ring of willow as a hole in the net to allow salmon to escape. And that was a belief that schools of salmon formed, they were families traveling together. And actually, if you look at the origin story of our reef net, it reflects the idea that salmon were once humans, and they still have a human spirit. And the really interesting part about that design, I was really struggling to create a design that represented the idea of a salmon swimming through the net. So So I asked Chris to help me, and he said he actually made a little template, and he utilized Coast Salish design, very specific elements. And he said, try this out. Try drawing a salmon head and turn it over and draw another one. And the really interesting part about this is that unintentionally, if you look at the center of the design, it almost looks like those are, 4 people holding hands, that are sort of just created by using positive negative space, in the salmon head and eyes. And in talking with Chris about that was unintentional, but it really expressed what we were trying to go for in terms of representing not only the reef net and salmon, but the fact that salmon are our relatives. So that was really cool. And then I was this is the first time seeing it today, but literally blown away by Chaz Elliott's art that he created, which represents the same idea. You can see the net, a ring of willow and a salmon swimming through. It's just so beautiful. And when you can read about this in the dissertation, in my dissertation, but one of the main teachings that I learned from my late uncle was that each salmon had a spiritual name and a common name in our language, and the spiritual name refers to them as relatives. So I think art like this really captures that idea, that concept, that worldview, that we're just so connected to salmon, and it's beautiful. So part of the intent, I think, of this exhibit and the theory of this exhibit was also to commission, not only gather art and artifacts relating to the reef net, but also commission new art. Chaz Elliott is a reflection of that. He just created that specifically for this exhibit. This is another one which represents the same concept, I think, the ring and the net and our connection to the salmon. This is created by Sarah Jim. She's a young, new up-and-coming artist. This is just an example of what could be a fishing camp. And I think that's problematic to think about our connection to our homelands and territories as, I think there was a misunderstanding that the land wasn't ours because we weren't permanently situated in one spot. But when you look at our language and look at our concept of territory, and through practice and through language, you would understand it's a different way of relating to the world, and that all of it was our territory. And that's a big part of the sort of the driving force behind this exhibit as well. We in Indigenous communities are trying to restore our relationship to the land through land-based healing, through practice, through language revitalization, and a lot of our efforts through the school system, particularly at our Cleona Tribal School. I also really wanted to express the idea that we as Indigenous nations have never been conquered. We've never sold our lands. We've never given it away. In fact, if you really look through our relationship to the land through language, you would really understand that idea was impossible in our worldview, and that's what this exhibit is hoping to reestablish. I understand that it could be years and years of rebuilding and working on resurgence of our Indigenous identity and nationhood in our communities. So I understand you watched this video. That was a video that a lot of the footage was taken during my work project, during my doctoral program. So, not a lot to say about that. I'm glad you watched it. I think that does really capture what happened in our community and is still happening. And this is to say that, no, it didn't start with me. This work started long ago, started with my elders, with my ancestors. It's been ongoing, in fact. And here you see a territorial declaration that was created in 1987. And you'll see that it's really awesome. Chief Lewis Claxton, that's my father. So he's been a leader in our communities for all of my life, literally. And he's born and raised in this territory. His first language was Central. And he had to learn English as a young boy, especially being sort of mandated to attend mandatory public education, the school system, right? So just to understand that's been a part of how the disruption of our knowledge systems and language in the community has been through education. But now we're getting to a point where education can contribute to the restoration of it as well.
The Douglas Treaty was in our oral history.
This is another art piece by Tomasin, Charles Elliott Sr., and it's representing Salish renewal. And you'll see a lot of those elements in Salish art: crescents, circles, U shapes and T shapes, and it's all often one-dimensional. But this is illustrating again those ideas that are intertwined through everything, through language, through practice. This one was an example of reef-net stone, but it was found at Macaulay Point, which is a Lekwungen reef-net site. In our language, it's called Chilang, net wave or net anchor stone. Go like that. What you're looking at there is the text of the Douglas treaties, which were, I guess, agreements between James Douglas, who is head of the Hudson's Bay Company at the time, and these were all signed between 1850 to 1854 between local Indigenous nations and the government at the time. So Douglas was given the responsibility to establish the colony in Vancouver Island and eventually the province of British Columbia, and his instructions were to purchase, and I'll put in air quotations, purchase the land from Indigenous peoples. And that's what he thought he was doing. But from our perspective, we thought he was just acknowledging us as nations. And a lot of that came out through our oral histories. And I'm not sure if the text or any of this is available online, but that's the kinds of ideas you'll see written in the text. It was my late Uncle Earl, Yelquaitsa, Earl Claxton Sr., who showed me that picture, and he said, before you go fishing, I know you just want to build a net and you want to get up there and you want to catch fish. He says, I think you need to build one of these reef net models first. And I didn't really understand why, but it was not until we acknowledged that the reef net, the practice, through ceremony, that I began to understand our connection to the reef net as a very spiritual ceremonial practice. And that's a really important element of our knowledge system and way of being as well, is that it's spiritual, it's ceremonial, it's intertwined with the land, the language, and our identity, and the natural world. These are more examples of anchor stones, which are from Main Island. So you can say that they are, it's a pretty good bet that they're Saanich anchor stones. I guess I just also want to say something about these anchor stones. For us, they were sacred, and those anchor stones would be passed on. Because when you think about it, stones last for a long, long time. These are probably old. But it's the net part that we would make fresh every year, but the stones would be reused year after year. And for us, they were sacred and special and passed down. So this exhibit too is meant to be, very dynamic. Utilize many different mediums. This one here is a video of, it's an underwater video of the reef net site at Pender Island, which belongs to my family, where they're able to video. You might see some anchor stones. So that's just, I guess it was designed to be able to sort of immerse ourselves into this experience. And this one is amazing. It's this one was created by Colton Ash, and it's called Pulse of the Salish Sea. And what he does, he's used, data to create this video image, which is meant to really give us a sense of the pathways of the salmon to the Fraser River. And you'll see that
But it's a ceremonial model.
where the Fraser River salmon migrate are exactly where our reef net sites are. So now that's really important as well. Our connection to the territory was through, inseparable from the salmon, right? And which I think takes us over here. This part called the band. So this is really meant to say that reef net fishing was banned according to our late elder Dave Elliott. He talks about it being banned in 1913, and that was banned by the Canadian government. But it was essentially to make way for industrial commercial fishing. That's a picture of the Point Roberts, I guess, where fish traps were built, basically on our reef net sites. Because our practices were so connected to the salmon that we needed to be removed so that colonialism could establish itself, which is, I think, important part of this reef net exhibit, is to raise awareness for the public to understand our connection to the territory and how it's been disrupted historically and contemporarily, and how we're making efforts to restore and revitalize our knowledge, our language, our practices, and our connection to the territory. is a model created by John Elliott. I guess it'd be
So I would like for us to consider not just the values, the beliefs, the culture, the language, the worldview, the perspectives that Nick has shared with us, but I also want us to think about the pedagogy in aspects that you saw from the exhibition. So I'll give an example. When we think of art galleries or museums as spaces for learning and spaces of learning, not just as a place where we go, we watch, we read the artist statements and that's it, but actually you probably didn't hear, unless it was a little bit on the background, that there's a song that was composed about the ReefNet technology. There's the data or the last map that you saw with the waves, the patterns of the waves. There is art from emerging artists. So we can stop and think a little bit about the different stimuli or the different ways in which also our senses are stimulated through an exhibition. There's the model of how people collectively, usually in a family, work together to put the net out and bring it back in. There's the song, there's the art, the audio, the video. So think also about how you might use an art gallery in the immediate future, similarly to this idea, following with your phone, or once everything goes back to close to the way it was, how you might use art galleries or museums as spaces for learning. So what kind of lesson plans you can develop, how is math integrated in any of these ideas of ReefNet technology, how art through the actual visual art and song, the drum that Nick explained, and so on and so forth. So just giving you some things to think about, or some pointers rather. And Nick is here. I would suggest that if you have questions about his work, maybe take this opportunity right now, because not only he is an assistant professor in Child and Youth Care, he's also a parent, and he's also chief of the Sayot Nation. So all of those responsibilities and roles that he talked about earlier when he introduced himself are very real, COVID or no COVID. So if we have a question for him, please take advantage of this few minutes that we have, and ask your question either using your mic or with the chat.
So is your course focused on pedagogies?
Mine is basically called Found Stories. So we've had Carrie Newman, we've had John Harris, Dorothea's son, who is now serving in the place of Sarah Rood as culture facilitator for School District 61. And we also had Keisha, I don't know if you remember Keisha Everson. She was in our summer institute, and now she's in her master's program on language. So she was also talking about her experience as a language champion and as a teacher.
Okay.
And then you are our last guest for the summer institute. So are there any questions from anyone out there?
So the question was, the ReefNet fishing seasonal? Yeah, I think in traditional times we didn't have months, we had moons. There's 13 moons in our year, and it's very connected to the natural world. And actually I was looking up in the sky last night, and you could see the crescent moon like that. So we're just moving into the new moon, which I think our moon right now is Chantaki, which is the sockeye moon. So we would have been moving out into the territory to be fishing right now. But yeah, so you can see that sort of disruption of our ways of being and knowing have been disrupted by, modern day, the modern world, through colonialism as well. Yeah, disconnected from our territory. So if you're thinking about pedagogies and ways of teaching about what's happening in the natural world at that point is one way of sort of bringing it back, connecting the world, natural world, and our learning and teaching.
You mind if I ask a question?
Go ahead. Thank you, Matt.
So you mentioned that there was some art by your uncle, and there was that document that was signed by your dad in the art exhibit. I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about the importance of having your family's art or bits of that history in your in this exhibit for you.
Yeah, for me, I think it does bring things sort of full circle for me. I think I talk about that sometimes as well, where education and mainstream schooling could be brought back to my learning and teaching in community, about my family, and it's sort of like restoring that in that sense a little bit. I think that's really important too when we think about when we first started to envision what this exhibit could be like. We thought about the opportunity for kids from the tribal school or from the Songhees Nation who are in the public school system to come here and for them to learn about who they are and how they're connected to the territory is really important. So that was a really important part of it for me.
Thank you for the question. There's another one from Tara who's saying, I was thinking the idea of leaving a hole in the net is such a small but powerful and thoughtful act of environmental respect. When comparing this to commercial fishing, which is based on weight and quotas, do you have any more suggestions as to how we can teach these small acts of respect and environmentalism in a classroom? Or any more examples of traditional environmental conservation?
Yeah, it's a really great connection, really great question. For sure, I think it is sort of a different way of understanding and relating to the natural world. Instead of thinking about salmon as a commodity, thinking about them as your relatives. Imagine how you would govern your fishing of them if you think of them in that way, as opposed to I just got to catch them all and I'm trying to just make money in that sense, right? I think this is one example of, there could be many examples of more sustainable ways of knowing and being that Indigenous peoples, because we've been connected to the natural world in our worldview since the beginning. That could be examples for us in contemporary times to be able to relate to the world in a more sustainable way. Reef net fishing is a great example because there is an actual modern version of reef netting that happens every year in a commercial sense, but it's operated by non-Indigenous commercial fishermen in Washington State. But they do promote their fishing practice, their industry, as a real model sustainable fishery, when in actual fact it's our knowledge and they've appropriated it in that sense. But it's one example and that's one way. I'd hope that we'd be able to, as straight Salish communities, really take part in the fishing practice, maybe even in a commercial way, albeit in a sustainable way. Maybe through a modern version of the reef net that they are currently using in Washington State. There's so many opportunities.
Another one says, you talked about how this became a project at the school and was used in various subject areas. Could you give some examples of that?
Yeah, I think, well, in terms of reef netting, we're talking about reef netting in social studies, for example, where they were looking at, the Douglas Treaty and all these things, and then maybe in English, when they were doing their writing, they write something about the reef net. You can do composition or poetry around that knowledge system. Obviously, in language class, in Choctaw language class, they'd be learning about some of the terminology around the language. Yeah, math. There's certainly a lot of opportunity to teach all the subjects through. And I think the new curriculum, if it's still called the new curriculum, does try to do that too, right? Our project-based learning as well. Focusing on a project, but using all your subject areas to work on that project, or to bring people together to work on one project as opposed to doing your own independent projects. So there's lots of opportunities for sure.
Yes, one of the things that I was thinking about is when you were talking about if we see someone as our relative, we had the opportunity to read Robin Wall Kimmerer's, one of the chapters from Robin Wall Kimmerer, and she said we need to acknowledge that we are related when we use the notion of personhood. What used to be an it then takes on a particular persona and takes up an identity, or takes on an identity, and then we treat plants, animals, or other beings as relatives, and it's in the power of language and in the way in which we use our language to refer to those other creatures or those other beings. So it just reminded me of that when we treat them, any creature, with respect, then they take a different meaning within our knowledge and within our worldview. So, yeah.
Oh, I was also just going to say some of the work that we're continuing to do at the tribal school is bringing kids from the different grades together, right? So not just separating them out, but bringing them all together. So there's this sort of intergenerational learning as well. Those kinds of opportunities created, bringing elders in. Yeah, knowledge keepers.
So there's definitely many opportunities to learn, and I would highly recommend that you look for the book. It's a very nicely done book that is can be utilized as an introduction, not only to the technology, but also introduction to many different subjects through the stories that are woven as part of the book. And you can find it in different libraries in different places. And also talk about technology. Sometimes we think of technology as these items here in front of us, but technology has been used, as Nick said, for millennia, and it has been and continues to be used to this day. And thanks to the work that you have been doing with your community, with the students at the tribal school, people are learning. Many of us are learning on the existence of this technology and what all the values and the worldviews that are embedded as it is woven, as it is worked, as it is thought of, and as it is used. So I guess that we're coming close to the end of our session together. I want to thank everybody for your presence, for your questions, and for keeping up with the work throughout the Summer Institute. And I just want to say HCM to you for your time, for the sharing of your knowledge, and for the learning that you shared with us today, which is really, really valuable. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you all. Thank you for inviting me to be part of your class and then being a part of all of your learning journeys. I really enjoyed it.